A vote for Joe Biden was supposed to be a vote for a return to normalcy. While the man himself did not build confidence for the most part among the American people, a lot of people thought that so long as we got rid of Donald Trump, it would all go back to normal. They were wrong. They thought Trump was creating the problems, creating the tension, and creating the culture war, when in fact, he was not. He was a symptom of this. The other day at the Super Bowl, Joe and Jill Biden put out a pre-recorded message calling for a moment of silence. It was a call for unity, and it was met with loud booing. People don't just dislike Joe Biden, they hate him. And we are seeing pretty serious calls to action from the left in references to bringing domestic terror tactics to the United States because the left also hates Trump's supporters. We are now hearing in response to this story that it turns out Trumpism was the problem the whole time, once again using Trump to define a problem that existed well before Donald Trump became president. The anger, the animosity, and the hopelessness that many people had that led them to vote for Donald Trump was not created by Trump. It is a problem of the system that still exists today. And there are a lot of reasons for it. Perhaps social media. There is a fracturing of worldview among the left and the right. And I'm going to tell you the very cliche and obvious thing, as per usual. I'm biased against the left on this one because I think they, particularly in the mainstream media, are the ones creating all of this tension and exacerbating the problems. Over at The Atlantic, Chris Hayes of MSNBC writes that it's Republicans that are radicalizing. Over at 538, they say the uncivil war or the culture war, it's the Republicans who are the aggressors. Meanwhile, the Republican Party is in shambles. Nebraska GOP wants to censure Ben Sasse. Wyoming wants to censure or may have already censured Liz Cheney. People who supported Trump are outraged that Mitch McConnell wouldn't do it. There's no real unity among Republicans, and Republicans don't get a whole lot done. They don't really fight for a whole lot. Mitch McConnell got a lot of judges in, but there is nothing comparing what the left is doing to the right. MSNBC, Nicole Wallace suggested drone striking American citizens. In a conversation, she was acting like the extrajudicial assassination of Americans under the Obama administration was a good thing, and that Mitch McConnell should have realized it. There is nothing comparable on the right. Now, you may have right-wing personalities who apply a double standard when it comes to them. They'll criticize the left, but not the right. They'll mock Jen Psaki's appearance, which is totally irrelevant. But the right does not have anywhere near the cultural power. And now, as they don't have any cultural or political power, the problem is the mainstream political left. Look, I'll look over at those progressives. And many of them, I think, do contribute to the problems, voting for Joe Biden, establishment crony. But I think many of them were just taken for a ride and duped, thinking that they were going to get $2,000 checks and it was the right thing to do. When Joe Biden came out and said, vote for us, you'll get $2,000. And Trump said, vote for me, I'll get you $2,000. But then the Republicans said no. Many people were like, I'm voting for $2,000. Well, guess what? Joe Biden said no. You're not getting it. Many of these populist leftists just incorrectly believed that Trump was the ultimate villain. And you're allowed to hate Trump. So maybe that was it. They said, I don't like the guy. Too bad. All right, well, Trump didn't win. But now you've got mainstream leftist personalities claiming that we should use drone strikes on civilians. That was never okay. The realignment is real. And the tribalism is only getting worse to the point where, it used to be this, maybe it's a long forgotten, hopeful image or memory of a president who didn't win every American's vote, but still received an applause when he arrived at a baseball game or the Super Bowl. Maybe that was just a happy, false memory. Maybe it was never that nice. Maybe there was always booing. I don't know. People seem to hate George W. Bush, but Joe Biden's still being booed. And now we are seeing in this article from Chris Hayes, while he does blame Republicans, he makes a very important point. The radicalization he blames the right. It's actually just continuing. It's not necessarily radicalization. It's hyper-polarization. Rural areas are getting redder. Urban areas are getting bluer. And it's just getting worse every single day. So how does this end? I honestly don't know. But I do think it is the natural conclusion of two-party politics. So we'll get into all that, and I'll break this stuff down, pointing out the left's double standard and the right being in shambles. But we'll start with what happened with Joe Biden's moment of silence. Before we do, however, head over to timcast.com to become a member and check out our members-only podcast segments and full episodes. For instance, we have a full hour-long episode talking about Netflix claiming there's proof of life after death. Exorcisms are actually on the rise. And we were talking about God with Seamus of Freedom Tunes. The reason we set up timcast.com is because it's very likely that as the culture war escalates, my channel will probably get banned. Facebook has already restricted my page, making it effectively useless. So there's almost no reason to post at all anymore. There will come a time, I believe, when we will reach an issue so just undeniable, and I'll have no choice to bring it up, that YouTube will give us the axe. I mean, take a look at what happened last week. Time magazine put out a story claiming there was a powerful cabal engaged in a conspiracy to fortify the election for the proper outcome by recruiting armies of poll workers. I can only imagine YouTube has me. I'm on thin ice with YouTube as it is. We will be doing a show. We do a show, the Timcast IRL podcast, live at every day at 8 p.m. So go to timcast.com, become a member, and don't forget to like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell. Let's read the story from meaw.com. Was Joe Biden's moment of silence at Super Bowl a flop? Tribute request for healthcare workers garners boos. They say Super Bowl, what is that, Super Bowl 60? No, I'm sorry, 55 is finally here. I think my Roman numerals are right. But it was not all smiles and celebration for all. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden made an appearance at the Super Bowl before the big game to send a message to fans while paying tribute to the frontline workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. Their recorded message, which was played on the video board at Raymond James Stadium, had asked fans for a moment of silence to pay tribute for those who lost their lives during the pandemic. But those present there were not kind when responding to the Biden's request, as there were boos and cheers heard during the moment of silence. Now, this is important. I do not believe there is unanimity in the feelings towards Joe Biden. This segment is not about everyone just hates Joe Biden. No, it's the split. Now, Joe Biden did receive the boos. That's important. My image, my memory of what the world used to be like may be wrong. But I imagined a president showing up and waving and people, cheering and just clapping and kind of being like, whatever, it's the president, right? Maybe that's just not true. Maybe it's always been this bad. Or maybe things are actually getting worse. Some people really like Biden. Some people really, really don't. They say, quote, that was the loudest moment of silence ever. One person tweeted, that didn't sound like a moment of silence. That moment of silence lasted 0 seconds. One person said, POTUS, let's take a moment of silence. Crowd. Ah! Yet another user mocked. Joe Biden got booed because nobody voted for him. Wahahaha. Another tweeted. No. But some people did cheer for him. And that's the problem. We are divided. Normalcy is not coming back. And my friends, I'm sorry. I know it's typical of Tim Pool bias. I blame the establishment left. Now, there are many progressives I would blame as well. There are some independent voices that I believe are duplicitous. And I believe there are many on the right who are as well. But as it has always been, the right does not control cultural institutions. The left does. So while Trump may squeak by, right now, the left, the establishment left, controls everything, the political and cultural institutions. They are no longer the resistance. They're the empire. Case in point, MSNBC host suggests killing American citizens with drone strikes. Is this the unity that Biden promised? Writes Paul Saka for theblaze.com. Well, let me slow down a minute. Maybe she wasn't necessarily saying we should drone bomb American citizens, although it kind of sounds like she did say that. She is at least defending the idea that the Obama administration killed American citizens without charge or trial, something the left would never tolerate. And 10 years ago, 8 or so years ago, when we were all complaining about this, many left-wing activists, it was the left that was adamantly opposed to the use of drone strikes for killing terrorists. And it was conservatives and Republicans who are like, well, we got to deal with the terror threat. Now everything's inverted. So it's a realignment that Chris Hayes actually brings up. But let me show you what Nicole Wallace actually said. They say, the Deadline White House host said, my question for you is around incitement. We had a policy, and it was very controversial. It was carried out under the Bush years and under the Obama years of attacking terrorism at its root, of going after and killing. And in the case of Anwar al-Awlaki, an American a Yemeni American with a drone strike for the crime of inciting violence, inciting terrorism. That is true. Anwar al-Awlaki was an American citizen. They said he incited violence against us. So Obama decided to just kill him. And to be fair, it was the National Security Council, but Obama signed off on the execution, the extrajudicial assassination of an American citizen. It is horrifying. We have a constitution. Mitch McConnell, here's a quote, Mitch McConnell was in the Senate then. He was in the Senate after 9/11 too. How does Mitch McConnell, who understands the way you root out terrorism is to take it on, in the case of Islamic terrorism, kill those who incite it? How does he not vote to convict someone that he said on the floor of the Senate incited an insurrection? What is the implication here? Is she trying to say that we've done way worse and at the very least you could convict Donald Trump? Or is she in some way actually defending it? Take it however you want. I know a lot of people are going to say, see, she was saying we should. And many on the left will argue, no, she was saying we've done way worse. I don't care. It should be condemned in every aspect and nothing should be equated to it. It's a realignment. But again, while there may be Fox News and Tucker Carlson, Fox News is one channel and their ratings dropped massively after the election. You still have MSNBC, CNN, CBS, NBC, ABC, etc. that are all left-wing biased. And this is what you get from The Atlantic. The Republican Party is radicalizing against democracy. The GOP is moderating on policy questions, even as it grows more dangerous on core questions of democracy and the rule of law. From Chris Hayes, MSNBC host trying to justify how it is that the Republicans are now in favor of gay marriage, yet they're the ones who are radical. You see what that means? You see what's happening? It's the realignment. Many people he brings up in this article used to be in favor of the Iraq war, and now they're against it. Amazing. It's a realignment. It's almost like there are many disaffected liberals who united with Republicans, and Republicans changed their stance to a more moderate position, partly because of it. And it may be that the left has become extremely radicalized to the point where you can actually, even The Atlantic and Chris Hayes will tell you, the GOP is moderating on policy questions. Could it be that you, Chris, that you, Nicole Wallace of MSNBC, that Joe Biden are the radical ones? And I don't mean socialist, I mean authoritarians. Could it be that you're the baddies and the Republicans moderating is a good thing, and disaffected traditional liberals and former liberals are now finding themselves more likely to align with Tucker Carlson, of all people, because you guys are the ones saying drone strikes were good? It's remarkable, isn't it? But let me show you just how crazy it really gets. In one section, and this I will give Chris Hayes good credit for. He writes, to a degree, or let me go back a little bit. He says, the average margin of those Democratic wins is narrow, about 2.5%. And the growing gap between the Electoral College tipping point state and the popular vote means Democratic coalition is becoming increasingly inefficient. The Constitution puts a wind at the backs of Republicans and makes them more competitive than they would be otherwise. And the political coalitions aren't fixed. The Democratic and Republican parties are in flux. He's correct about this. Let me just simplify. We are a republic, a constitutional republic with democratically elected representatives. This means there can and will be minority rule in many circumstances. And it means we're going to see a lot more of it when you have people forming coalitions. Just the way it is. Many people on the left think that we're a democracy, that we simply have a majority rule. We don't. The saying goes, democracy is two wolves and a lamb deciding what's for lunch. A republic is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. It's a famous quote. I believe it's from Benjamin Franklin. But let me go on. He says, to a degree that has little precedent, place, as opposed to region, has become a strong predictor of voting patterns. Democrats are winning fewer and fewer counties while still winning national majorities. And Republicans are winning wipeout margins in the large majority of rural counties across the country while hemorrhaging votes in major metro areas. In 1984, Ronald Reagan won 80 of the 100 counties that had the highest density of college graduates. But in 2020, Joe Biden won 84 of them. That's amazing. Rural voters are moving to the right and suburban voters to the left in nearly equal proportion. What's more remarkable about this density divide is that it reinscribes itself fractally. If you zoom in on precinct level data, you'll find that even in very rural areas, the precincts closest to the center of a town are reliably Democratic, or at the very least, reliably less Republican. And I have personally witnessed this. I have driven around in many rural areas from Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia, the DC area, and I found something really amazing. You will be in Trump country, and then you get to a small town and there's Black Lives Matter signs everywhere. And it's so strange. I'm like, how are we in this county that is like deep red, yet when you go into a city, you see all this leftist ideology? Perhaps it has something to do with proximity to one another. Perhaps it has something to do with people in rural areas communicating through the internet, and the internet giving a voice to many conservatives who normally would not network. You see what this means? Back in the day, conservatives would rally around singular voices, talk radio, people like maybe Glenn Beck or Rush Limbaugh. Well, most of the news still came from these major networks, and while people did watch Fox News, people still got their news from similar sources. Conservatives, for the most part, weren't meeting each other and sharing these ideas. What I'm trying to say is, perhaps even 10 or 20 years ago, conservatives would still be moving leftward without realizing it, which is why we are seeing a GOP that is moderating on policy. Perhaps that's something that's always happened. The difference now is that Republicans can resist to a certain degree in rural areas where they can communicate online, thus creating stronger bonds to preserve certain ideas, or at least create a flow of ideas. In the past, urban centers, even small towns, would control the political ideology because people in rural areas, for the most part, weren't communicating with each other or anyone else for that matter. Now on the political stage, they can. Their voice is being heard, and it's leaving many on the left confused. It is the Democrats, the establishment left, and many leftists that are pulling further and further to the left, probably as well because the cities themselves are networking. Now here's what I think is happening. People are moving. I mean, I think COVID caused a massive upset in where people live. So you probably saw a lot of conservatives start moving from suburban and bluer areas into more red areas. I mean, take a look at me, for instance. I'm a center left, kind of Democrat. I think it's unfair to say that I was ever a strong Democrat, although a lot of conservatives try to claim that, and many liberals try to claim that I was never. I voted for Obama in 2008. Didn't care to vote for anybody after that. I've always been fairly independent. And if anything, much more in favor of third parties. The two-party system is rather broken. But here I am finding myself moving to the middle of nowhere in a red area. I still find there are very blue cities in some of these red areas. But I come out here and I see a bunch of Trump voters, and that's just it. Someone like me, a traditional liberal from Chicago, not I'd say I was very progressive when I was younger. Now I'm more in the traditional liberal camp, though I'm not a fan of Democrats. Not like I'm a fan of Republicans either. Finding myself in a red area. So people who are more inclined to be in a red area will move there, and people more inclined to be in a blue area will move to blue areas, thus solidifying the regional differences between these factions. And I think it's kind of worrying. There's another major aspect of this, though, and I think it has to do with the two-party system. On the Timcast IRL podcast earlier this year, I interviewed a candidate in North Jersey. This is an area that is deep, deep blue. And I was interviewing a Republican, and I wondered why it was the Republicans would not provide support. Well, it's obvious. It's a D+30 district. Why waste money on an area that's deep blue that's never going to vote Republican? But you see, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't go to these areas and advocate for your ideas, you'll never win. Well, they don't, because the cost is too great. So here's what happens. The Democrats start to prioritize pushing out their message in areas they think they can win. They leave areas they think they can't win. Republicans do the same. They'll look at polling and say, look, it swings 2 points to the right, so we shouldn't bother. Or maybe we can actually try and fight for this area. In the long run, Democrats will only be bothered to win areas they think they already can, and Republicans the same, thus creating deep red, deep blue, and nothing in between. That's the danger here. We need Republicans to run in blue areas to generate political competition. But because we have a two-party system, and because the federal government is controlled by the majority party, no one cares to actually communicate. They just keep segregating, and there's no overlap. Now, we still have some conservative Democrats and some slightly left-leaning Republicans. Jeff Van Drew joining the Republican Party, probably a good thing, at least for now, but ultimately a bad thing, I think. He's a moderate Democrat. He was. And then he left and became a Republican. And now he's he's a moderate Republican, but he's fairly left-leaning as a Republican. We also have in West Virginia, you have Manchin, who's a Democrat, but from West Virginia. So he's kind of more right-leaning. These are the remnants of days long since past. I can't imagine these individuals. Well, I'm sorry, Jeff Van Drew actually won. I'm not entirely convinced Manchin will stay senator. We'll see how West Virginia votes. But we can see that the blue dog Democrats, the more moderate and conservative Democrats, the pro-2A Democrats, they're losing a foothold. You still have some Democrats up in the Northeast, like Vermont, New Hampshire, or pro-2A. So that's a different subject matter, to be completely honest. But we are absolutely seeing this divide. Now, for that, I'm not going to completely blame the left. That's just the system in general. But the exacerbation of the culture war, in my opinion, absolutely does come from the left. Let me show you this. Molly Jong Fast says Florida is going to kill us all because regular people, not Trump supporters, were out celebrating the Super Bowl. Florida is going to kill us all. Yep. Mary L. Trump responds, DeSantis needs to be charged with crimes against humanity. How dare these people in a pandemic with this new variant go out and hug and kiss and jump and dance? Surely it's the end of the world. Molly, I would like to ask you about your criticism for when everyone came out to support Joe Biden on November 7th, 2:30 p.m. Molly said, might be time for Jared and Ivanka to find a new place to live. And it's everyone out in the streets. Now, look, maybe Molly actually had some criticisms for this people and I didn't see them. I looked through her Twitter. This is just something we see all too often. They have routinely defended Black Lives Matter and those people celebrating Biden, but they've defended that and then heavily criticized regular Americans celebrating the Super Bowl or Trump supporters standing around on the steps of a state capitol saying they're spreading COVID. It's a super spreader event. Okay, well, criticize your own. Why? Why not? That, my friends, is the double standard. You know it exists. Most people know that this is the problem. But when you have the editor at large for the Daily Beast and this is their stance, you have a lot of disingenuous people and a lot of victims, a lot of people who just buy into this and believe this. Now, the reason I single out Molly Jong Fast is that she has 848,000 followers. It is ripe for criticism. By all means, I believe so am I. I have a similar amount of followers, a bit less, to be honest. But I think we need to call out that double standard whenever we can. And then I'll point out when people say, but Tim, what about the Republicans and the conservatives? They're bad. Oh, spare me. Miles Taylor, the GOP is in shambles. Last week, we convened top conservative voices to discuss a reform movement or launching a new center-right party. More to come. There's talk of the Patriot Party. Now there's talk of a new center-right party because Trump is far right. And then there's the GOP left in shambles, where we have GOP Senator Ben Sasse slams Nebraska GOP over censure. Politics isn't about the weird worship of one dude. Then we have in Wyoming GOP censures Rep. Liz Cheney over impeachment vote. Yes, the Republican Party is in shambles. They don't have any cultural power. Look at this. I went on the Joe Rogan podcast. I know it's kind of dumb. It always gets brought up, but it does get brought up because it was a big and important cultural episode. I was on Joe Rogan with Jack Dorsey and Vijaya Gadde talking about issues like this. And people accurately pointed out two liberals arguing with two liberals about censorship against conservative is a problem. And I said, that's actually a good point. Joe needed to get a conservative on, I suppose, because it ain't me. But they'll like to claim that I am. No. Some of the best representation conservatives are getting are from people like me. I'm not a conservative. But I'm actually looking at what they're saying, listening to what they have to say, and then saying, here's what they said. You don't get that from the media. You don't get a fair approach because the media is left culturally. The editor at large of the Daily Beast clearly biased against regular people supporting the Super Bowl, but clearly defending, or at least ignoring, what the left was doing when Joe Biden won. Jumping up and down, drinking champagne, passing it around. Now, conservative media does have some power, and that's the point I was making earlier. Finally now, conservatives are building strong lines of communication between each other in rural areas. I believe that if this was, if the internet didn't exist, 10 years on now, conservative areas would still probably be blue because they would only get their news from people in blue areas or from newspapers in blue areas. But now they get their news from a national level conservative voice, be it Ben Shapiro or Crowder, or more moderates like me. Their ideas are stronger. They maintain their positions, and that creates a solid red base. And then the blue areas get bluer, not because they're getting, not because of ideology, but because they always were moving to the left. You see the issue here. And take a look at this from 538. In America's uncivil war, Republicans are the aggressors. If you wanted to be fair, you'd at least say that there is a serious tribalism problem between the left and the right. But for years, we've had Antifa on the left going around and attacking people. 538 has the nerve to write an article like this. Well, it's because our media institutions are blind. They don't know what's going on. They don't care to know what's going on, and they're biased. That's it. They'll defend or ignore Biden supporters dancing in the street and then criticize regular Americans. Perry Bacon Jr. for 538 says, in his inaugural address, President Biden described America as in the midst of an uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. His invocation of a civil war and the American Civil War was provocative. It was also accurate. There is no formal definition of an uncivil war, but America is increasingly split between members of two political parties that hate each other. That's true. In the same speech, Biden warned of the dangers of a rise in political extremism, white supremacy, and domestic terrorism. This, too, was accurate. Biden was delivering his address exactly 2 weeks after a group of Trump supporters of Trump, riled up by a false claim of voter fraud, stormed the Capitol. And that was stupid. But here's the problem. I listened to Ben Shapiro. I heard one of his segments and he says, it was dumb, it was wrong, they shouldn't have done it. And I'm like, that is the leading conservative voice for you. Or one of them at least, telling all of the people how wrong it was to storm the Capitol. Oh, Ben. Oh, he's right. The reason I say, oh, Ben, is because, of course, Ben Shapiro is going to come out and criticize that because it was wrong to do. And I have no problem saying it. And other conservatives have no problem saying it. And I'm not saying I'm conservative. I'm saying in a moderate position, of course, I'll condemn it. Of course, many people on the right will condemn it. Where was the left condemning the riots from Black Lives Matter? They were defending it, saying you need to understand their anger and protests are meant to make people uncomfortable. And Kamala Harris raised money for them. Don't you see the problem? It's not the Republicans who are the aggressors. The most prominent voices on the right, people like Ben Shapiro, for instance, are the ones saying it was dumb and they shouldn't have done it. On the left, they defend Antifa and Black Lives Matter. I'm sorry. When a group of middle-aged Trump supporters go wave little American flags in Berkeley and Antifa shows up and throws explosives at them, as I personally witnessed, the aggressors weren't the Trump supporters. Now, is there a problem of white supremacy and all that stuff? Yeah, of course. Is it the worst problem in this country? Personally, I don't think so. I think the biggest problem in our country is tribalism and the explosion of this extremist rhetoric that's starting to occur. And it's not coming from the right. Regular Americans are not the people who stormed the Capitol. There was several hundred who broke in. There were hundreds of thousands who were in D.C. who left peacefully and never set foot on the Capitol. Thousands did. Many people will be arrested. But what is that? A few percent of the overall group that actually showed up? And what about the 75 million? 800 of the 75 million who voted for Trump actually went to the Capitol. You see the problem. Meanwhile, you want to talk about extremist rhetoric? Let's talk about Nicole Wallace talking about drone strikes and how that's how you take on terror while equating it with American citizens. I'm sorry, that's the extremist rhetoric. Now, I've seen some nasty rhetoric from people on the right yelling about how it's 1776 and about I got to take action and things like that. Of course it exists. My friends, it's not like there aren't bad people on the right. There are, but the right isn't unified right now. They don't control cultural institutions. They aren't dictating content. They aren't going on the most prominent shows and advocating for this stuff. Tucker Carlson, at the very least, is center right, and they call him far right. And if it's funny because you look at what Tucker Carlson believes, and he's fairly moderate, calling out endless wars. Even Chris Hayes brings it up in his article. When he mentions Tucker Carlson, he says, by 2020, Tucker Carlson, who had vocally supported the Iraq War and browbeat liberal opponents for their opposition, was railing against warmongers and endless wars. In fact, ending endless wars became kind of a right-wing rallying cry. Could it be that the Republican Party is saying, you know what, maybe we were wrong, that right-wing individuals and conservatives were like, we were definitely wrong about that. And then traditional liberals of principle are saying, thank you for agreeing on the right thing. And the left has become the party of warmongers and moral authoritarians. I think that's the case. And ultimately, I think that's why you see a mixed reaction to Joe Biden. This country is split. It's getting worse. I think the fissure can't be mended at this point. You know, for a long time, I said this country is being split and something needs to be done to bring people back together. I think unity is impossible right now, especially because the most prominent voices in mainstream media are saying no to it. So it just won't happen. So what happens next? Well, I've long talked about the possibility of civil war. Now 538 is just saying it straight up. That his invocation of civil war in the American Civil War was provocative. It was accurate. What does that mean? Please, leftists, grifters, the people who like to pull my clips out of context and then claim I was ever, asserting there was going to be a 50-state landslide when I was giving hypotheticals of what could cause one. Why don't you take the old clips of me talking about civil war and then push the insane lie again that I was saying it's coming, the end is nigh, it's happening. My point was either we're facing an information war, a fifth generational civil war, or what we're seeing will lead us to one. Was I wrong? Maybe. Absolutely maybe. I don't know what's going to happen. I just think this is the track we're on. But what happens when even 538, the famed political forecaster, is now saying it's accurate for Joe Biden to invoke civil war? I think it's scary. And I think it's a sign of what's to come. As more and more people start to see the signs and then say, I think so too, people are going to get riled up. Certainly like it to not be the case. And maybe Michael Malice and many others are right about a peaceful divorce. I guess it's part of the conversation that needs to be had. Well, we'll keep talking about this stuff. So make sure you check out Timcast IRL, youtube.com/Timcast IRL. The next segment will be the live show tonight at 8 p.m. We're going to be discussing international conflict and stuff like that and crazy new technologies. And we're going to try and make things more interesting and entertaining and less negative and less conflicted as we see here. So again, youtube.com/Timcast IRL. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Thanks for hanging out. You can become a member at timcast.com, and I will see you all tonight at 8 p.m.